The one-and-done player is commonplace in today's NBA, whether they're spending a year in college or a year in the G League. But back in the late 2000s, on the heels of the NBA's new rule that prevented players from making the jump straight out of high school, there was a wiry thin guard who decided to think outside the box. Brandon Jennings found a way to go pro straight out of high school, except he had to do it on a different continent, spending a year in Europe before declaring for the draft. And while his time in Europe didn't go as planned, he took the NBA by storm as a rookie.
Jennings, Bucks rookie record, 53 points.
And looked to be the future of the Milwaukee Bucks. But that soon changed, and he was sent to Detroit after a few years, where he would play the best basketball of his career until an injury changed everything, as he would only appear in parts of 3 seasons post-injury. And while his career was unfortunately cut short, he was a trailblazer. And yeah, it wasn't perfect, but he still showed every future top recruit that you can still chase your dream, even if you're running down a different path. Let's jog your memory. Born in Compton, Brandon Jennings got a first-hand look at the fame that can come with being a high school basketball star, as during his preteens, there was a future Defensive Player of the Year dominating for local Dominguez High School in Tyson Chandler, and Jennings just happened to be the ball boy for that team. He got a close-up look of the good and the bad attention that comes with being a top high school prospect. And by the time Jennings got to Dominguez in the mid-2000s, he was well on his way to becoming that next star. And according to Jennings, he may not have played big minutes as a freshman, but he was making his minutes count by making the important plays. And he would say that he really got his name out there when he dropped 25 points on Mater Dei in the playoffs. Then as a sophomore, Jennings estimated that he averaged about 12 points, 9 assists, and 7 steals, yet Dominguez lost in the playoffs. But up to this point, Jennings had been coasting, and school had taken a backseat to basketball, and his mom wasn't happy about his grades.
It was okay, and the team was great, and the coach was great and everything, but his academics I just couldn't put up with. So I had to move him out.
So she would move him to the remote basketball powerhouse, Oak Hill Academy. A move like this could help Jennings' future in 2 ways. 1, it could help Jennings keep the necessary grades to be college eligible, and 2, it would allow him to improve his skills against some of the nation's top competition. But as a junior, Jennings thought he could keep coasting, not putting full effort in at practice, and even skipping practice. But after he was suspended for it, he did a full 180 and became a team leader, and in turn saw his stock rise over the next 2 years. Once Jennings got settled, he and the rest of the Oak Hill team started rolling, as their only loss of the season would come to a Derrick Rose-led Simeon team, as they would finish the season with a 40-1 record while being crowned national champions by USA Today, as Jennings finished the season with averages of 15.2 points, 4.1 rebounds, 11.5 assists, and 3.5 steals, and would even dish 21 assists in a single game. But as a senior, his role changed. Some of Oak Hill's top scorers left early, so while Jennings had been used to getting them the ball so they could get buckets, he would be the one that had to get buckets this year, and he got a lot of them. He had some standout games, such as going for 36 points in an overtime win over Duncanville to snap their 52-game winning streak. Then he had a game versus Dudley, when he drained his first 9 shots and overall finished with 49 points. But his game against Raleigh Bonner Academy made that look like an off night, as he would drop a school record 63 points. And it could have been more, as he was subbed out with 5 minutes left in the game. Oak Hill wasn't as dominant as last year, finishing at 34-4, but Jennings was also the only senior starter, so who knows what their record would have been without him, as his senior averages ended up being 35.5 points, 5 rebounds, 7.5 assists, and 4 steals per game, while shooting 50% from the field and 35% from deep. And he was recognized with a laundry list of awards, which included being a first-team parade All-American and a McDonald's All-American, as well as the National Player of the Year, as a 6'1", 170-pound Jennings was above everyone as the nation's #1 recruit. But this is where things would get interesting. Jennings had originally committed to USC as a junior, as he felt he could come in right after OJ Mayo and the team wouldn't miss a beat. But then as a senior, he flipped and instead committed to the University of Arizona, as he would later say that he felt pressured to commit to his hometown Trojans prematurely, and that Arizona's play style fit him much better. and reportedly he had upped his GPA to 2.8 during his time at Oak Hill. But then came the ACTs, and after scoring poorly on his first attempt, he did much better on his second attempt. But he did too good, as the sudden jump in his scores caused his test to be red flagged, with Jennings saying that he didn't try the first time, but had tried the second time, so he took it a third time. But before he had gotten his results back, the trailblazing reports broke. In mid-July of 2008, it was announced that Jennings had signed a deal to play professionally in Italy. As with Jennings' college eligibility seeming up in the air, he didn't want to lose out on a year of preparation for the NBA. If this would have been a few years earlier, Jennings could have made the jump to the pros straight from high school. But the new CBA was in place, which required players to be a year removed from high school and at least 19 at the time of the draft. So the top players would spend a year in college, then go pro. But Jennings didn't look to have that option. He could have stayed in the US and joined the D-League, but according to many, this would have put a target on his back for other players to try and embarrass him. So he took a road that had never been traveled by a high school recruit, as he went overseas. And with him having a 1-year opt-out clause in his contract, it was clear he was still going to be one and done. It's just that his one was happening on a different continent. And another thing that rarely gets mentioned is that before Under Armour became one of the most well-known brands due to their partnership with Steph Curry, they signed Jennings to be their first marquee star during his time in Europe. However, he didn't exactly look like a star in Europe, as even though it wasn't the NBA, Jennings was still a pro, playing with and against long-established European players, as he was now just another guy on the team. And while he was still showcasing another option for high schoolers, it didn't look the most appealing. Jennings' year with Virtus Roma was a humbling experience, as he was no longer a guy who always had the ball in his hands, and he wasn't expected to create shots or score at will. Instead, he was expected to play hard on defense and hit the open shot, if the ball came to him. He was clearly most effective in transition, as there were few players in Europe who could keep up with him in the open court. However, the European game is half-court dominant, which didn't suit Jennings' playstyle, especially when he was still just a 19-year-old kid learning the game. And according to Jennings, he was treated like a kid and was rarely paid on time. But Jennings did what he could, averaging 5.5 points on only about 35% shooting, while getting 17 minutes a game in Series A play. Then he showed some improvement in EuroLeague play, with 7.5 points on about 39% shooting, while getting almost 20 minutes a game. But overall, this had not played out the way Jennings had hoped, as his year in Europe didn't really turn heads. But reportedly, it did not affect his draft stock either, with there being some positives to take out of it, as he had developed as a defender, and one NBA assistant still said that if they needed a point guard, they would be happy with Jennings. But where would he stack up in what looked like a strong 2009 point guard draft class?
The 10th pick in the 2009 NBA draft by the Milwaukee Bucks, Brandon Jennings, is here, so why don't you welcome him?
So Jennings went top 10, yet he was the 4th point guard off the board, as the 2009 draft saw 11 point guards taken in the first round. And while it was an unusual path to get there, Jennings was finally in the NBA, and joined a Bucks team who hadn't made the playoffs since 2006, and had traded away their most consistent scorer from last year in Richard Jefferson. So they hoped that bringing in Jennings would give them the scoring threat they needed. And Jennings had also proven his ability as a passer in high school, so with his quickness and ability to penetrate off the dribble, it looked like he and Michael Redd could work well together, with Jennings drawing in the defense, then kicking it out to Redd. But Redd would only manage 18 games this year, and with Redd out of the lineup early in the season, Jennings dropped 32 points in just his 6th NBA game, in a win over Denver. And while this would be a season high that most rookies would be proud of, a few nights later, the Golden State Warriors and their rookie point guard Steph Curry came to town. And coming off the Denver game, Steph knew that the key to victory would be slowing down Jennings.
We're here in Milwaukee. We had a good game tonight. We got a blazing hot rookie, Brandon Jennings. Got to figure out how to slow him down.
And after the first quarter, the Warriors were doing exactly that, as Jennings had gone 0 of 3 from the field and was scoreless. But then he started really getting shots up in the second, attempting 10 shots and making 4 of them, as he went into the half with 10 points. But then Jennings turned in one of the greatest single-quarter performances that few people talk about, as in the third, he went 12 of 13 from the field, including making 4 of 5 3-pointers. as he racked up 29 points in the third quarter alone, and the Bucks would outscore the Warriors by 17 in the quarter. Then even though Golden State outscored Milwaukee in the fourth, Jennings still poured in another 16 points on 5 of 8 shooting, capping off a historic Milwaukee Bucks performance, which saw him set a single-game franchise rookie scoring record.
129-125 on a record-breaking night for Brandon Jennings. 55 points, a Bucks record.
And finishing 2 points off of Michael Redd's franchise record of 57. So Jennings looked like a good pick, and overall his first 34 games saw him put up good scoring and assist numbers. Yet he would shoot below 40%. But then in early January, Redd was lost for the season, and after, Jennings saw his production drop, as teams could fully focus on shutting down the rookie. The Bucks tried to get Jennings some help with a trade near the deadline that netted them John Salmons, who would be the team's leading scorer by season's end, as Jennings would finish third on the team in scoring and first in assists and steals. And while he was taking a lot of shots, he was still a handful for defenses in just year one, and would finish top 3 in Rookie of the Year voting. And the Bucks turned it around down the stretch, as they were 24-27 going into the All-Star break, but went 22-9 the rest of the way, as they were a surprise playoff team, securing a first-round matchup with Atlanta. Jennings showed out in his playoff debut, going for a postseason career-high 34 points on 56% shooting, in a Game 1 losing effort. He came back down to earth in Game 2 with 9 points on 3 of 15 shooting, as the Bucks headed back to Milwaukee down 0-2, and it looked like a sweep was coming. But they got on the board with a Game 3 win that saw Jennings put up a solid 13 points and 5 assists. Then in Game 4, he had an efficient 23 points along with 6 assists. And all of a sudden, the series was tied. Then after a 25-point Game 5 performance, the Bucks were 1 game away from a series victory. But Atlanta staved them off in Game 6, as Jennings went 1 for 9 from deep en route to 12 points. Then they fell short in Game 7, as Jennings had an inefficient 15 points. As his rookie season ended with him averaging about 15.5 points, 5.5 assists, and 1.5 steals per game. So the Bucks had been a nice surprise last year. An unexpected playoff run without their top player. It looked like their future was bright, with guys like Jennings and defensive big man Andrew Bogut. But Redd's time as the Bucks star was over, as he would appear in just 10 games in what would be his last season with the team. So now Jennings was without a doubt option number 1 on offense. And in just his 3rd game of the season, he recorded his first career triple-double in a win over Charlotte, as he went for 20 points, 10 boards, and 10 assists. But after a 10-15 start, Jennings fractured his foot and missed the team's next 19 games. But it probably could have been less, as he finished the game that he broke it in and played 30 minutes versus the Jazz a few nights later, before requiring surgery and eventually returning to an 18-26 Bucks team. But he still took some time working his way back, and even though he would lead the team in scoring on an improved average from last year, he was only putting up about 16 points a game, which isn't very high for a top scorer. And when you add in him missing a quarter of the year, it's understandable that the Bucks had the league's worst offense, with their top 3 defense being the only thing that kept them from being near the bottom of the league. But they would still just manage a 35-47 record and miss the playoffs, as Jennings' year had ended with him averaging about 16 points, 5 assists, and 1.5 steals per game. The lockout occurred over the summer, and Jennings, along with many other players, kept themselves game ready throughout this time, and it also helped his foot strengthen, as even though he was still playing over the lockout, he could play more at his own pace, so as to not aggravate anything. And when the lockout ended, Jennings joined a Bucks team who looked similar, yet had brought in Steven Jackson over the offseason. And scoring-wise, Jennings was having the best season of his career, averaging over 19 points per game, and doing so on nearly 42% shooting, which would be a career high. And he would take nearly 6 3-pointers per game this season, but his 129 made threes were a top 5 mark in the league. Yet the Bucks were having a rough year, and Jennings needed some help. Bogut had played in just 12 of the team's first 42 games, and Steven Jackson had significant conflict with head coach Scott Skiles, leading to his benching. So in mid-March, the Bucks made a big move. Needing to make a change, Milwaukee packaged Bogut and Jackson to the Warriors, and in return received a package headlined by high-scoring combo guard Monta Ellis. So even though the Bucks now had one of the smallest backcourts in the league, with 2 guys who were most effective with the ball in their hands, they also had 2 lightning-quick, bona fide scorers who allowed them to play at one of the fastest paces in the league. Yet even after adding Ellis, Jennings remained the team's top scorer and second best distributor by season's end. However, with the Bucks sitting at 18-24 at the time of the trade, they didn't have enough time to climb out of the hole. As while they would go 13-11 post-trade, a 31-35 record would not get them a playoff berth, as Jennings' year had ended with him averaging about 19 points, 5.5 assists, and 1.5 steals per game. With a full season of Jennings and Ellis, the Bucks would continue to play at one of the league's fastest paces. And with these two being elite penetrators, Milwaukee tried to surround them with some shooters to kick out to when they drew in the defense. And it was evident, as both Jennings and Ellis averaged at least 6 assists, with Jennings' then career-high 6.5 assists leading the team, and his 17.5 points being second on the team. And on defense, the quickness of their new duo led to the two combining for nearly 4 steals per game. But efficiency continued to be Jennings' biggest weakness, as while he was exceptionally quick, he wasn't exceptionally tall, even for a point guard. And at only 170 pounds, he wasn't really out-muscling anyone. But you couldn't say the Bucks' backcourt wasn't exciting or high-powered, as Jennings alone would have 10 games with at least 30 points and record 13 double-doubles this season. Yet after 32 games, the Bucks were sitting at 500 when Skiles was fired and assistant Jim Boylan was promoted to head coach for the rest of the year. And he fared even worse, as under Boylan the Bucks would manage just 22 more wins all season, as they would finish with a 38-44 record. But in a weak Eastern Conference, that was enough for the final playoff spot, as they were set to take on the defending champion Miami Heat. Jennings came out with a solid 26 points in Game 1, yet shot just 8 of 20 from the field. Then in Game 2 he struggled further, with 8 points on 3 of 15 shooting, while missing all 7 of his 3-point attempts, as the Bucks fell behind 2-0. But that didn't shake Jennings' confidence in him or his team, as when reporters asked him how he felt about the series going forward, Jennings let them know, Bucks in 6. And whether it was realistic or not, what else was he supposed to say? And Game 3 would be his best all-around performance, with 16 points, 8 assists, and 5 steals. Yet the Bucks fell again. Then after going 1 for 7 from the field 3 nights later, the Heat completed the sweep, as Jennings' year ended with him averaging about 17.5 points, 6.5 assists, and 1.5 steals per game. But now Jennings was a restricted free agent, and he felt he had done enough to warrant a respectable long-term deal, as he would say that if the Bucks were to give him a 1-year qualifying offer for the upcoming season, there would be no way he would re-sign with the team after that. And with Milwaukee reportedly having offered Jennings a 4-year, $40 million deal prior to the beginning of last season, which Jennings had declined, they likely felt it was a lost cause, and didn't want to lose Jennings for nothing. So in late July, Jennings' time in Milwaukee came to an end. The Bucks would orchestrate a sign-and-trade deal with the Pistons, as Jennings signed a 3-year deal worth about $24 million before being sent to Detroit. The Pistons were in the midst of one of their worst playoff droughts in the past 30 years, but looked to be building something, as they had brought in Mo Cheeks to coach the team, and had added high-flying forward Josh Smith through free agency, joining a Pistons team who featured an elite rebounder in Andre Drummond, a promising 4th-year big man in Greg Monroe, and longtime Piston Rodney Stuckey. And it seemed that a guy who could create his own shot and score on the perimeter like Jennings was the piece that they were missing. But what Jennings would really display this season is how good of a passer he could be when he had the right pieces around him. Jennings' scoring would drop to his lowest average since his rookie year, but he would still be the team's second leading scorer. Yet his 7.6 assists would be a career high and would lead the team, while also being the 6th highest mark in the league, as Jennings would record a career high 18 double-doubles this season, with one of those coming in his return to Milwaukee on December 5th, when he went for 17 and 11, and most importantly, a win. Then about a month later, he tied Isaiah Thomas's franchise record with 16 first-half assists in a win over Phoenix, as he finished the game with a season-high 18 assists. Yet things just weren't coming together the way the Pistons were hoping, as they were one of the worst 3-point shooting teams in the league, as well as one of its worst defenses, and were sitting at just 21-29 after 50 games, when head coach Mo Cheeks was let go and replaced with John Lawyer for the rest of the season. And while they weren't great, they were still just half a game out of the East's final playoff spot at the time of the Cheeks firing. But then things completely unraveled, as they would win just 8 of their final 32 games to finish at 29-53 and miss the playoffs. as Jennings' year ended with him averaging about 15.5 points, 7.5 assists, and 1.5 steals per game. The offseason had seen the Pistons bring in Stan Van Gundy, but as quickly as they had put together their new-look team, they were breaking it up, as after just 28 games this season, the Pistons would waive Josh Smith. But Jennings was again having one of his better years, as his scoring was about the same as last year, and while his shooting wasn't great, it was above 40% for just the second time in his career. And even though his assists were down slightly, he was still the team's top distributor. He suffered a hyperextended thumb on his shooting hand in late November, and his scoring suffered because of it. But he really started picking up his play in January, as he would record 3 games with at least 34 points this month, including his season high of 37 in a January 16th defeat of the Pacers. Then less than a week later, he went off against the Magic, as he scored 24 points, but also set a career high with 21 assists in a win, as this was truly a high point, with him playing his best basketball ever. But 3 nights later in Milwaukee, his career hit its lowest point. Late in the third quarter, Jennings went down while guarding a Bucks inbound pass.
I mean, he was flopping all over the place. He is really in pain.
And with this being a non-contact injury, you couldn't help but suspect the worst. And unfortunately, that's what it would be, as a ruptured Achilles ended his season, as his 41 games saw him average about 15.5 points, 6.5 assists, and a steal per game. But this was more than just a season-ending injury for Jennings, as it put his career in jeopardy, and at the very least, it severely jeopardized his effectiveness, as Jennings' biggest advantage was being one of the quickest players in the league, and no one knew how much of that quickness would be lost due to this injury. So the rehab process began, and Jennings worked to get back to playing shape. And while most players of his caliber would expect to return to their former role on their NBA team once they came back, Jennings again took a different route, as about 11 months after the injury, he voluntarily accepted an assignment to the Pistons D-League affiliate in the Grand Rapids Drive, without any complaints. And really, he didn't even want to get any media attention for it. He just wanted to get back on the court. And in his first D-League game, he went for 11 points and 12 assists. And that was all Detroit needed to see, as they called him back up a day later, and he played his first NBA game post-injury on December 29, as he went for 7 points and 4 assists in a loss to the Knicks. And over his next 23 games, he put up modest numbers coming off the bench, up until the trade deadline, when the Pistons saw an opportunity to get younger and shipped a package including Jennings to the Orlando Magic. So Jennings' brief chapter in Detroit came to an unfortunate end, but at least he was reunited with his old coach in Milwaukee, as Skiles was the head coach of the Magic, who were boasting a 23-29 record at the time of the trade. Jennings came out strong with 18 points in his Magic debut, but over his final 24 games after that, he would hit double figures in just 5 of them, as Jennings would get similar minutes and put up similar numbers in Orlando, and the Magic would finish with a 35-47 record and miss the playoffs, with Jennings' overall year seeing him average about 7 points, 3.5 assists, and half a steal per game. So now Jennings was still a few months shy of his 27th birthday and a free agent, and while at one point, this summer looked like it would be Jennings' biggest payday, the Achilles injury had really messed that up. But Jennings would still get a deal, as he was signed to a 1-year contract with the New York Knicks to be a backup to the recently acquired Derrick Rose. And while this would have been a lethal combo 5 years earlier, it was a different story in 2016. So Jennings would spend most of the season with the Knicks, but he wasn't the best fit. New York played at a slower pace, and even post-injury, Jennings was best when he could get out and run. Jennings mostly came off the bench, but the Knicks would experiment with a starting backcourt consisting of him and Rose at times. But aside from a season-high 32 points as a starter in a late December win over Houston, Jennings just wasn't producing how the Knicks hoped, and he wanted more playing time, which the Knicks were giving him as the season went on, but it wasn't leading to much winning. So Jennings informed the team that he would like to go to a playoff team, and when the Knicks couldn't find a trade partner, the two sides mutually agreed to a release in late February. And a few days later, Jennings signed with the Washington Wizards team, who were sitting at 36-23, as a combo guard who could back up point guard John Wall or shooting guard Bradley Beal. And while his scoring and efficiency was at an all-time low in his final 23 games with Washington, he was dishing nearly 5 assists a night and helped the team go 13-10 the rest of the way, as their 49-33 record got Jennings his first return to the playoffs in 5 years. And after a quiet Game 1 versus Atlanta, Jennings turned it up over the next two, as he averaged 11.5 points and 3 assists on a combined 8 of 11 shooting, and Washington went up 2-1. But over his next 3, he scored a combined 7 points. But the Wizards were able to wrap it up in 6 to move on to a second-round matchup with Boston. Jennings would be a lot quieter in this 7-game series, as he would record points in just 2 games, and saw his minutes take a big hit near the end of the series, which the Wizards would lose, as Jennings' year ended with him averaging about 7 points, 5 assists, and a steal per game. The Wizards elected not to re-sign Jennings after the season, and unfortunately, he didn't have teams lining up for his services, so he went back overseas. Only this time he went to Asia, signing on to play for the CBA's Brave Dragons. And while he only appeared in 13 games, he still made it look easy, averaging nearly 28 points and 7 assists per game. But he was always planning an NBA comeback, and dominating like this in China helped restore the confidence that had gone away due to his injury. And after securing his release from the team in December, he returned to the States, focused on finding an NBA roster. And in March, Jennings was back where it all began, first appearing with the Bucks G League affiliate before joining the team for a March 12th game against Memphis. And in his first action in nearly a year, he went for 16 points, 12 assists, and 8 rebounds off the bench, and overall would appear in 14 of Milwaukee's final 16 games, while recording double figures one more time, as it was announced in early April that the Bucks had signed Jennings long-term, and a young Bucks team would finish with a 44-38 record and get a first-round matchup with Boston. But Jennings rarely saw the court, appearing briefly in one game of a 7-game series loss, with his brief comeback seeing him average about 5 points, 3 assists, and half a steal per game. Unfortunately, even though Jennings had signed a multi-year deal, it wouldn't last long, as the Bucks released him in August to free up roster space, as this marked the end of Jennings' NBA career. But for the 3rd time since he graduated high school, Jennings went overseas, this time playing for St. Petersburg in Russia. But this was over quickly, as his contract was terminated after 10 games, with Jennings taking to Instagram to express his displeasure regarding his time with the team. In more recent years, Jennings would see his infamous Bucks in 6 quote become a rallying cry for the Bucks' 2021 championship-winning team, with Jennings receiving a lot of love from Milwaukee during that period, and even helping design the team's championship rings. And while his playing career is over, nowadays you can still catch Jennings talking basketball as a regular on the Gilbert Arenas podcast. There can be misconceptions around Brandon Jennings when you look at his low shooting efficiency, in that you may think he's a me-first player who cared first and foremost about getting his shots. But he also doesn't get enough credit for his passing and his fearlessness in the big moment. And yeah, the shot selection was rough at times, but he never really played on teams who gave him much help, especially in the form of shooters or shot creators. But Brandon Jennings needs more to be recognized for his fearlessness in taking a different route to the NBA and accepting his role when he was in Europe. Then even after carving out an established role in the NBA, he accepted a D-League assignment without issue coming back from his injury, and in later years, continued to play the role that was asked of him. As a top recruit and high draft pick, Brandon Jennings had every reason to be difficult or have an ego, but instead, he should be used as a prime example of all the sacrifices a player who really loves basketball might have to make to keep playing the sport they love. And Brandon Jennings, more than anything, showed how to do it all with poise. But that's it for today's episode on Brandon Jennings. Hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. If you liked it, check out this one on one of his Bucks teammates, or this one on another guy who made a stop in Europe before playing his first NBA game. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.